The first rule of living in a homeowners association is that you don't talk about the HOA. The second rule is that you don't piss off the HOA. I, in my infinite wisdom, had managed to break both rules within a month of moving in. But it wasn't until a sunny Tuesday afternoon that I learned the real first rule of HOA life. Never, ever underestimate a woman named Karen armed with a pair of garden shears and a righteous sense of beige-fueled fury. It all started with a notification on my phone. A simple, sterile message that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Bridge camera feed offline. I'm a tech guy. My love language is gigabit fiber, and my idea of fine art is a perfectly executed cable management system. So, when I traded my cramped Silicon Valley condo for a sprawling suburban house in what was billed as a master-planned paradise, my first order of business wasn't picking out paint swatches. It was creating a digital fortress. My property backed onto a small, babbling creek with a quaint wooden bridge, my bridge on my property, connecting my lawn to a patch of woods. It was the perfect choke point. It was the digital Thermopylae for my state-of-the-art 4K night vision, AI-powered security cameras. I'd spent a solid week trenching, laying armored conduit, and mounting the cameras in housings that could probably withstand a small meteor strike. I was proud. I was secure. I was, in retrospect, an idiot. A second notification buzzed. Bridge camera 2 feet offline. Then another and another. A cascade of digital death notices. My beautiful, expensive, meticulously installed sentinels were being systematically blinded. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled to pull up the feed from my main backyard camera, the one that had a commanding view of the bridge. The image resolved on my 49-inch curved monitor. And there she was, in all her glory. Karen, president of the HOA, Grand Inquisitor of Lawn Ornaments, Supreme Commander of Approved Mailbox Colors. She was clad in her battle armor, a crisp beige pantsuit that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager of the universe." In her hand, she wielded a pair of heavy-duty garden shears, snipping through my armored cables with a grim satisfaction. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips as the last cable fell, swinging uselessly in the breeze. The audacity was magnificent. It was a declaration of war. I stared at the screen, my mind a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. This was the woman who had issued me a formal citation because my welcome mat, which read, "Come back with a warrant," was not an approved earth tone. This was the woman who had demanded the immediate removal of a tacky and unapproved garden gnome that I hadn't even put there. She had escalated from passive-aggressive notes to active, malicious destruction of property. My first instinct was to call the police, to storm out there and confront her. But I knew that was a losing game. It would be my word against the HOA president's. A messy, protracted battle of he said, she said that would end with fines and more rules. No, this was a technological assault. It required a technological response. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Karen thought she had cut the head off the snake. She had no idea I was a hydra. I turned from my command center, my desk, and walked to the large closet that housed my other passion projects. For the past year, I'd been building and perfecting a small fleet of custom drones. They weren't flimsy little toys. They were carbon fiber and titanium beasts, equipped with whisper-quiet, brushless motors, gimbal-stabilized 4K cameras, and a sophisticated mesh network that allowed them to communicate with each other. I'd built them for aerial photography, for land surveying, for the sheer, unadulterated joy of engineering. Now, they had a new purpose. They were my airborne vengeance. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes after Karen snipped the last cable, the air in my backyard began to thrum with a low, menacing hum. One by one, 6 drones lifted vertically from their charging pads, their navigation lights blinking in unison. They ascended like a swarm of angry hornets, a digital phalanx rising to defend their creator's honor. I sat back down at my desk, my fingers flying across the keyboard. With the fluid grace of a concert pianist, I maneuvered the fleet into a perfect diamond formation, hovering 100 feet above the bridge. Their cameras, far superior to the ones Karen had just butchered, zoomed in, capturing her moment of triumph in stunning, crystal-clear detail. She was admiring her handiwork, her chest puffed out with pride. She hadn't noticed them yet, but she would. Oh, she would. The war for the bridge had just begun. The moment Karen's brain finally registered the low, persistent hum from above was a cinematic masterpiece I'll treasure for the rest of my days. Her smug satisfaction melted away, replaced by a look of profound confusion. She tilted her head, her eyes scanning the sky like a bewildered chicken. When she finally spotted the half-dozen dark shapes hovering in perfect formation, her jaw unhinged. Her face cycled through a Rolodex of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. I had a 4K, 60 frames per second view of it all, and I savored every pixel. From the soundproof comfort of my office, I was a digital god, observing the meltdown of a petty tyrant. Her mouth opened and closed, forming words I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. This was a woman who had built her entire identity around control, and I had just introduced an element of chaos she couldn't possibly comprehend. Her shock quickly metastasized into action. Hilarious, futile action. She brandished her garden shears, a tiny, ineffectual St. George against a squadron of mechanical dragons. She lunged, she swatted, she jumped up and down, her beige pantsuit flapping around her in a display of impotent fury. My drones, with their advanced obstacle avoidance systems, effortlessly bobbed and weaved out of her reach, their movements so fluid it looked like they were mocking her. It was a beautiful, silent ballet of technology versus tantrum. At one point, she picked up a piece of mulch and hurled it into the air. It fell back to earth with a pathetic thud, nowhere near its intended targets. After several minutes of this one-woman slapstick routine, Karen, red-faced and panting, admitted defeat. She shot one last venomous glare at the sky, then turned on her heel and marched back toward her own beige fortress. I knew, with the certainty of a man who has read the first chapter of a very predictable book, what was coming next. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled to a stop in front of my house. I'd used the intervening time wisely. On my coffee table sat a freshly printed, beautifully organized 3-ring binder. The cover, in a simple, bold font, read, Project Aerial Oversight. Inside, nestled in crisp sheet protectors, were copies of all relevant local and federal drone ordinances, my FAA registration certificate, detailed flight logs for the past month, and a high-resolution laminated satellite image of my property lines, with the bridge circled in red and clearly marked, Private Property. I was not just ready. I was practically vibrating with preparedness. 2 officers emerged from the car. The senior one, a man with a weary face and a name tag that read Sergeant Miller, looked like he'd seen it all and was profoundly unimpressed by it. His partner, a younger woman named Officer Chen, had a sharper, more curious glint in her eye. Karen was hot on their heels, a whirlwind of righteous indignation. "He's spying on me?" she shrieked before the officers had even made it up my driveway. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the drones, still holding their silent vigil over the bridge. "He's got a whole swarm of them. It's a violation, an invasion of my privacy." Sergeant Miller let out a sigh so heavy it could have registered on the Richter scale. "Ma'am, If we could just take a breath." "I will not take a breath," Karen shot back. This maniac is conducting an unlicensed surveillance operation from his suburban home. This isn't Langley, Virginia." I chose that moment to open my front door and step onto the porch, the binder held casually under my arm. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, my voice the auditory equivalent of a calm, serene lake. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Sergeant Miller's gaze shifted to me. His eyes were tired, but they held a spark of something. Maybe intrigue. "Sir, we've received a complaint about your, aerial vehicles." "My unmanned aerial vehicles?" I corrected gently, savoring the technical term. "Yes, they're part of a personal cartography project, and I can assure you they are operating in full compliance with all applicable regulations." I stepped forward and offered him the binder. "I've compiled all the relevant documentation for your convenience." To my delight, Sergeant Miller actually took the binder. He opened it and began to flip through the pages, his eyebrows rising slightly. Officer Chen leaned over his shoulder, her lips pursed in a failed attempt to suppress a smile. Karen, meanwhile, was making a sound like a teapot reaching its boiling point. But he's watching me," she insisted. "It's creepy! He's a creep!" Officer Chen finally spoke, her voice a model of professional patience. "Ma'am, the law is fairly clear on this. As long as the drones are flying over his own property and not recording you in a place where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, like, for instance, inside your bedroom, he's not doing anything illegal." "But the bridge!" Karen wailed, clutching at this last straw. "He's monitoring the bridge." I decided to step in for the kill. "The bridge, that is, according to the county assessor's plat map right there in tab C, entirely on my property," I said, pointing to the binder. "The same bridge where you were observed not half an hour ago, willfully destroying several $100s worth of my personal property." I paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. "I have that on a different camera, by the way. A terrestrial one. Excellent 4K resolution. Would you like to see the footage?" The color drained from Karen's face. It was a glorious sight. She looked like a vampire who had just been shown a crucifix made of pure garlic. She opened her mouth, but for the second time that day, no sound emerged. She was utterly, completely checkmated. Sergeant Miller closed the binder and handed it back to me. "Sir, we'd appreciate it if you could be considerate of your neighbors." He then shot a pointed look at Karen. "And ma'am, I would strongly advise you to stay off your neighbor's property and to refrain from any further landscaping activities involving his cables." With a final, weary nod, he and Officer Chen beat a hasty retreat, leaving Karen and me in a silent, supercharged standoff. She gave me a look that could curdle milk, then spun around and stomped back to her beige castle. Victory was sweet, but Karen was not a woman to be so easily defeated. The next phase of the war was one of cold, petty escalation. First came the wind chimes, dozens of them. She hung them from every tree, every lamppost, every available surface, creating a constant, discordant jangle that she presumably hoped would interfere with my drone's guidance systems. It didn't. All it did was make her own yard sound like a haunted trinket shop. Next, she armed herself with a high-powered military-style flashlight. Every time she stepped outside, she'd scan the skies and, upon locating one of my drones, attempt to blind its camera with a beam of light powerful enough to signal the International Space Station. It was a valiant effort, I'll give her that. But my drone's cameras had auto-adjusting light filters. The blinding beam was instantly compensated for, reduced to a soft, ethereal glow in the footage. Her assault looked less like a countermeasure and more like she was trying to start a rave. It was clear that the drones, while an effective deterrent, were not a permanent solution. I needed to rebuild. I needed to fortify. I needed to create a camera system so robust, so utterly Karen-proof, that she would break her spirit, and possibly her garden shears, trying to defeat it. And for a job like that, I needed a specialist. I found Frank on a local contractor's website. His profile picture was a blurry photo of a man with a magnificent walrus mustache and a beer gut that spoke of a life well lived. His shirt read, "I can fix anything. P.S. Stupid is not fixable." The reviews were glowing, praising his craftsmanship while also gently warning of his direct communication style. He was, in a word, perfect. I called him and laid out the entire sordid tale: the HOA, the doormat, the gnome, the cable cutting, the drones. When I finished, there was a long, silent pause on the other end of the line. Finally, a low, gravelly voice rumbled through the phone. "So, let me get this straight. You've declared technological warfare on the head of your homeowners association?" "That's a fair summary, yes." Another pause. This one punctuated by a low, appreciative chuckle. "Son, I like your style. I'll be there tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp." The next morning, precisely at 8, a gloriously mud-splattered Ford F-250 that looked like it had just returned from a tour in a war zone rumbled to a stop in front of my house. Frank swung himself out of the cab. He was even more majestic in person. He was built like a refrigerator, with hands the size of dinner plates, and a handshake that felt like it could recalibrate my spine. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. The severed cables, the hovering drones, Karen's house with its cacophony of wind chimes. He took it all in, then turned to me, a slow grin spreading across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You weren't kidding, flyboy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand that nearly sent me to my knees. "I try not to," I said, recovering my balance. "So, what's the play here?" he asked, his voice a conspiratorial grumble. "Are we just replacing the cables, or are we making a statement?" A wicked grin mirrored his own. "Frank," I said, "I was hoping we could build a monument." And in that moment, under the watchful eyes of my drone fleet, an unlikely and beautiful alliance was forged. The tech nerd and the gruff contractor, brains and brawn. We were about to turn my little suburban bridge into a testament to spiteful ingenuity. Karen had no idea what was coming. Frank's professional assessment of my previous installation was both swift and brutal. He nudged one of my severed armored cables with the toe of his steel-toed boot, a look of pity on his face. "This is cute," he declared. "Real cute. It's like putting a beware of dog sign on a Chihuahua's doghouse. This Karen of yours, she's operating on a different level. You want to stop her, you can't just build a wall. You gotta dig a moat and fill it with crocodiles." Our project, therefore, was less a repair and more a military fortification. The battle for the bridge, as Frank gleefully called it, had begun. His plan was a masterpiece of over-engineering, a symphony of concrete and steel. We started by digging a trench 2 feet deep, far beyond the reach of any common garden tool. Into this trench we laid not just 1, but 3 layers of protection. First, a thick, industrial-grade steel conduit. Then, we encased that conduit in a layer of rebar, and finally, the pièce de résistance. We filled the entire trench with high-strength concrete. Frank smoothed the final patch with a trowel, stood up, and patted the now impenetrable line like a proud father. "Let's see her get through that with her petunia shears," he grunted, sweat beading on his formidable brow. The cameras were next. We replaced my old models with what Frank affectionately called the honey badger of surveillance. They were behemoth, dome-shaped units housed in what looked like miniature bank vaults. We mounted them on custom-fabricated 10-foot steel poles that we sank into even deeper concrete footings. They loomed over the bridge like silent, unblinking sentinels, a clear and present message to any would-be vandals. But Frank's true stroke of genius, the cherry on top of our spite-fueled sundae, was the sprinklers. "Motion activated," he'd explained, his mustache twitching with suppressed glee. "But not just any motion. We need smart sprinklers." This was where my expertise came in. We installed a series of high-pressure, commercial-grade sprinkler heads along the perimeter of my property, all aimed directly at the entrance to the bridge. I then spent a glorious evening writing a custom script for the controller. Using a combination of thermal imaging and object recognition, the system could distinguish between a squirrel, a deer, and a human. More specifically, it could distinguish between a person passing by and a person loitering with intent. If the system detected a human-sized thermal signature lingering near the bridge for more than 7.5 seconds, it would unleash what I dubbed the hydroelectric greeting, a targeted 3-second blast of water. Not enough to hurt anyone, but more than enough to deliver a very wet, very clear message. Move along. The two of us made quite a pair. Frank's mud-caked truck became a semi-permanent landmark on our pristine street, a beautiful, dirty middle finger to the neighborhood's sterile aesthetic. We blasted a steady stream of Led Zeppelin and AC/DC from a portable speaker, the screech of power saws and the thud of hammers providing our rhythm section. We were an island of productive chaos in a sea of tranquil beige, and I could feel Karen's rage radiating from her house like heat from a furnace. Her espionage efforts intensified. She was no longer content to just peek through her blinds. She began taking long, meandering walks, her pace slowing to a glacial crawl as she passed my property, her head cocked at an unnatural angle as she strained to overhear our plans. She even acquired a pair of binoculars, which she would use from the cover of a large HOA-approved azalea bush across the street. She was less a suburban homemaker and more a character from a bad spy novel. Her bumbling attempts at intelligence gathering were destined for disaster. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, as Frank and I were calibrating the final sprinkler head, her curiosity finally got the better of her. She crept from behind her azalea bush, binoculars pressed to her eyes, inching forward to get a better angle on our work. She stood, mesmerized, for a moment too long. 8 seconds, to be precise. Whoosh! The hydroelectric greeting activated with hydraulic perfection. A powerful, concentrated jet of water shot across the lawn and struck her with uncanny accuracy. It was a beautiful, shimmering arc of liquid justice. Her shriek of pure, unadulterated outrage echoed through the quiet afternoon air. She stood there for a stunned moment, dripping from head to toe, her binoculars hanging limply from her neck, her beige pantsuit now a pathetic, clinging, see-through mess. Then, with a cry of fury, she turned and squelched her way back to her house, leaving a trail of water and shattered dignity in her wake. Frank and I froze, looking at each other. A beat of silence passed. Then we erupted. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a deep, cathartic, body-shaking roar of triumph. It was the sound of two men who had worked hard, planned meticulously, and watched their plan come together in the most spectacular way imaginable. The call to the police was, by now, a foregone conclusion. Not 20 minutes later, Sergeant Miller and Officer Chen's cruiser pulled up once more. They climbed out of the car with an air of profound weariness, like parents who had been summoned to school for the 3rd time in a week to discuss their delinquent child. Karen, now in a fresh, dry, and equally beige outfit, was waiting for them on the sidewalk. This time she was armed with a Ziploc baggie filled with blurry, water-spotted photos she'd presumably snapped with her phone mid-dousing. "They're building a fortress!" she announced, her voice trembling with a potent cocktail of fury and victimhood. "It's a hostile construction zone. They have pipes and wires. And they have a water cannon. They assaulted me with a water cannon." Sergeant Miller took the baggie of photos and peered at the blurry images inside with a completely deadpan expression. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat as a sun-baked highway, "these appear to be photographs of two men performing lawn maintenance." "It's not maintenance. It's military grade," Karen insisted. "They're creating a perimeter, and their weaponized sprinkler system attacked me without provocation." I stepped out onto my porch, a picture of calm, neighborly innocence. "Officers," I said with a warm smile, "always a pleasure. Is everything all right?" Sergeant Miller turned to me, and I could see it, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. A suppressed smile. "Your neighbor has some concerns about your new irrigation system," he said, his voice laced with professional restraint. "Ah, yes," I said, nodding thoughtfully. "The hydroelectric greeting. It's a new eco-friendly system designed to deter deer. It's a little enthusiastic. Still working out the sensitivity settings. I do apologize if she was startled." Officer Chen, who had been admiring our concrete and steel handiwork, let out a low whistle of appreciation. "That's some serious conduit you got there," she said, sounding more like a fellow contractor than a cop. "And are those Class 3 weatherproof housings?" "Only the best," Frank boomed from behind me, wiping his hands on a rag. "You skimp on the housing, you're just asking for trouble." Sergeant Miller handed the bag of useless photos back to Karen. His patience had clearly reached its end. "Ma'am," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "your neighbor is installing a sprinkler system and some security cameras on his own property. No laws are being broken. I would suggest you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." He then turned to me, lowered his voice, and gave me a subtle nod. "And you, sir," he said, the ghost of a grin finally breaking through. "For what it's worth, nice setup." He and Officer Chen walked back to their car, leaving Karen sputtering on the sidewalk. As they pulled away, I saw Sergeant Miller's hand come up to his rearview mirror. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but there was no mistaking it. A thumbs up. The war for the bridge had become the stuff of local legend. My quiet rebellion had ignited a spark in the neighborhood. I started finding anonymous gifts on my porch, a six-pack of a local IPA, a bag of expensive single-origin coffee beans, a note on elegant stationery that simply said, "Godspeed." The neighbor, with the non-compliant white picket fence, a man I'd never spoken to, gave me a crisp, military-style salute as I drove by. I had become a symbol, a hero to the silently oppressed masses who just wanted to live with a welcome mat of their own choosing. The bridge was secure, the fortifications were complete, but I knew Karen. She had been defeated on the battlefield, her tactics exposed, her authority ridiculed. A woman like that doesn't just surrender. She regroups, she re-strategizes. She was cornered, humiliated, and armed with the full labyrinthine power of the HOA bylaws. She was about to go nuclear, and the fallout zone was going to be the community center ballroom. Karen's final, desperate gambit was to move the battle from the physical world to the bureaucratic one. She called an emergency meeting of the Covenants Committee, a grandiose title for what was essentially her own personal star chamber. The email notification, sent to the entire homeowners listserv, was a literary work of art, a masterclass in passive-aggressive pearl clutching. It spoke of a series of troubling incidents, a flagrant disregard for our community's aesthetic harmony, and the urgent need to address a pattern of escalating and deeply concerning behavior by one of our newer residents. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. I was the star of the show. I walked into the community center's beige, soul-crushingly bland ballroom, feeling like a Christian being led into the Colosseum. The room was divided, both physically and ideologically. On the right sat Karen's loyalists, a grim-faced phalanx of beige-clad sycophants, their faces etched with practiced concern. On the left sat my people, a motley crew of suburban rebels. There was the picket fence guy, a woman who'd once been fined for having excessively cheerful Christmas lights, and a dozen other neighbors I recognized from their furtive, supportive nods. Frank was there, a flannel-clad mountain in a sea of pastel polo shirts. He'd squeezed his large frame into one of the flimsy folding chairs and gave me a look that said, "Let's do this." The meeting began with all the pomp and circumstance of a minor royal wedding. We pledged allegiance to the flag. The secretary read the minutes from the previous meeting, a thrilling 20-minute saga about a heated debate over the approved species of geranium for community flower beds. Finally, the moment arrived. Karen, her face a mask of solemn gravity, strode to the podium. Behind her, a large projection screen flickered to life. My blood ran cold. She had a PowerPoint. Of course she had a PowerPoint. "My dear friends, my neighbors," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "I have brought us all together today because our peaceful, harmonious community is facing a grave crisis. A crisis that threatens the very foundations of our shared life." The first slide appeared. It was a grainy, heavily zoomed-in photo of one of my drones, looking sinister and menacing against a cloudy sky. The title, written in a dramatic, blood-red Comic Sans font, read, "The Unblinking Eye." For the next 15 minutes, Karen delivered a performance worthy of an Oscar. She presented a meticulously crafted narrative of terror, painting me as a rogue agent, a suburban Bond villain. She showed slide after slide of my fortress, my weaponized water cannons, and my drone army. She spoke of Orwellian surveillance, psychological warfare, and a blatant and hostile disregard for our community's covenants. Her pièce de résistance was a blurry long-lens photo of me and Frank sitting on my porch, drinking beers after a long day's work. The caption read, "The conspirators plotting their next move." She was brilliant, in her own twisted way. She was weaving a tapestry of fear, and her supporters were eating it up, nodding along with every baseless accusation. I saw a few of my own allies shifting uncomfortably. Doubt was a weed, and Karen was sowing it with expert precision. When she finally clicked to her last slide, a simple, ominous question mark, a hush fell over the room. She surveyed her audience, a smug, triumphant smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. She had made her case. She had painted her masterpiece of paranoia. And now, the lamb was being led to the slaughter. I walked to the podium, not with a binder full of papers, but with a sleek, minimalist tablet. I didn't say a word. I simply unplugged her laptop from the projector and plugged in my own. The giant question mark vanished, replaced by a stunning, crystal-clear 4K live feed from my lead drone, Alpha, hovering silently 200 feet above the community center. The image was so crisp you could count the petals on the beleaguered geraniums in the flower bed out front. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm and even. "Karen has presented you with a very creative story. I'd like to present you with something a little different. I'd like to present you with the truth." With a single tap on my tablet, the live feed was replaced by a video. The title, in a clean, elegant Helvetica font, read, "A Few Neighborly Misunderstandings." I had spent the entire previous night editing. The video started with high-resolution footage from my backyard camera, showing Karen, shears in hand, methodically and gleefully snipping my cables. The collective gasp from the audience was audible. The video then cut to a multi-panel view from my drone fleet, showing her comical, flailing attempts to swat them from the sky, her face contorted in rage. I'd set that part to yakety sax. The laughter started as a low titter, then grew into a wave. Karen's face went from pale to crimson. But I wasn't done. The next scene was my piece de résistance. Using footage from 3 different angles, I had created a slow-motion, frame-by-frame replay of the sprinkler incident. I showed her creeping from the bushes, the sprinklers activating, the jet of water arcing through the air in a perfect parabola, and the moment of spectacular, soaking impact. For this sequence, I'd chosen the triumphant crescendo of the 1812 overture. The room exploded. The laughter was deafening. My supporters were roaring, some wiping tears from their eyes. Even a few of Karen's own beige-clad disciples were struggling to hide their smiles. Frank was slapping his knee, his guffaws echoing through the ballroom. Karen looked like she was about to have an aneurysm. I let the video play out, then switched back to the live drone feed, the image of our peaceful, quiet neighborhood filling the screen. "My security system is not a weapon," I said, my voice cutting through the subsiding laughter. "It's a response to a deliberate act of vandalism which you all just witnessed. My drones are not an army. They are my eyes, which I now need to protect my property from being damaged again. I didn't move here to cause trouble. I moved here for peace and quiet. But peace and quiet cannot exist under the thumb of a bully who uses the HOA bylaws as a weapon to harass her neighbors." A smattering of applause started, led by the picket fence guy. The woman with the cheerful Christmas lights stood up and joined him. In seconds, nearly the entire room, save for Karen and her few remaining shell-shocked loyalists, was on their feet, giving me a standing ovation. The vote was a mere formality. The motion to have me censured and forced to dismantle my fortress was defeated by a margin so wide it was comical. Karen, utterly and completely humiliated, her reign of terror shattered in a blaze of high-definition glory, grabbed her purse and stormed out of the ballroom without another word. In the aftermath, a new era of détente dawned on our street. The HOA, under new, saner leadership, rolled back some of Karen's most draconian rules. My drones became a permanent, accepted part of the skyscape, a silent reminder that the age of beige tyranny was over. Karen became a neighborhood ghost, a subdued figure seen only in fleeting glimpses. Frank and I became fast friends. Our weekend ritual now involves beers on my porch, watching my drone fleet perform their silent, graceful patrol patterns against the sunset, and reminiscing about the great suburban war of that summer. My life was anything but the tranquil paradise I had envisioned, but it was something better. It was interesting. Last night, as I was enjoying a cold IPA and watching the world go by from my digital command center, my phone buzzed with an alert from a new motion sensor I'd set up on the street. A moving truck had just pulled up to the house 2 doors down. A new family was moving in. I zoomed in with my long-range camera, just out of curiosity. On their front lawn, amidst a sea of boxes, was a pink, plastic flamingo. An unapproved, unapologetically tacky, gloriously pink flamingo. I leaned back in my chair and took a long, satisfying sip of my beer, a slow grin spreading across my face. The war was over, but the games, it seemed, were about to begin again, and I, for one, was ready.